you for giving me this opportunity. I'm NirodeBramdaw. I'm a member of the NSBPF, and I'm from African Sun Media. I'd also like to thank the organizers for giving me the graveyard shift. But I will assure everyone online and here that we have a very entertaining address that would come from my colleague, Crain Soudien. On my panel this afternoon, I'm privileged to have Professor Crain Soudien, who's a former DVC at UCT and the former CEO of the HSRC. And as you all know, has its own press. So that also reported into him. So he's quite aware, acutely aware of the publishing landscape. Furthermore, he's authored several books and written hundreds of articles. So it makes him quite an expert on the subject. I'm also joined by, well, I was supposed to be joined. Let's give apologies for Professor Aslam Fataar, who took ill all of a sudden and was unable to make the meeting here today. He was looking forward to it, but unfortunately had taken ill at the last minute. Finally, we have Ms. UjalaSatgoor, the Executive Director of UCT Libraries. Ms. Satgoor is the former chair of the Higher Education Library Association of South Africa and has sat on various national and international library organizations in various capacities. My topic is diversity and ensuring diversity in academic or scholarly publishing. And I think that one of the speakers earlier alluded to the fact, I think it was Barbara Boswell, that publishing is political. And I think, and in her choice of publisher and in her choice of looking at the ownership of the publisher, etc. And I think we need to go back, and I was hoping Aslam would have done this for me, but in a previous conversation I've had with him, he did give me some of the background, and I can certainly verify that from my own experiences in my alma mater, UDW, a historically disadvantaged university that was merged with UKZN. And in the 60s and 70s, you had leading academics that came through from these institutions and probably others where people of color were confined to study. And these were world-leading researchers. To name a few, our keynote speaker here this morning, Professor Ahmed Bawa, is a product of UDW. And so is my esteemed colleague, Andrew Joseph. So amongst others, there was the Bharatram brothers and Dev Prakash, who did world-leading researches. And the landscape of developing research at that time was that in our historically disadvantaged institutions, you had white professors who were very often cast there because of their inability to get into historically advantaged institutions. So you had a substandard academic supervising your work. And then when you do get through that work, you choose to publish internationally because that's where you get even respect. And it's not racially based. But I'm not going to go too much into our historical background, and I'm going to leave that to Crain. I threw him on the spot this morning when I heard that Aslam was ill. And I asked him to cast his mind back to the early days and the publishing landscape in South Africa and what we've inherited and how we can put diversity front and center, foursquare on the publishing agenda nationally. And I was hoping Ahmed would be here, but I would update him later. So over to you, Crain. I see you have a presentation to do, and then we'd go to Ujala, and then we can have some questions and conversation. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Nirod. Can you all hear me, colleagues? Okay, so I am by no stretch of the imagination an entertaining person. I just am totally incapable. So please don't ask me to make a joke. So, but thank you very much for having me here, and thanks for asking me, Nirod. And all of you. There's a great deal to talk about around these questions of diversity, and I could, on the spot, be talking to you historically, and hopefully a little bit of that could emerge in conversation. But that's not what I had prepared. But I'll try and bring some of that into the presentation. I'm essentially going to build on a point that came very early this morning. I think it was you, Veronica, who said that this relationship between what was published and the state of our universities was absolutely central, and that's the fact of our university lives over the last almost 200 years. So what I'm going to be probably spending too much time on is just to give you a sense of what this university environment, this university landscape in terms of people looks like. And I'm going to try and link that to what the publication environment is all about. So this is the clicker. Okay. So where do I point? I'm hitting the bottom. Okay.
Emmanuel, please click for me on the screen.
Okay. All right. Okay, thanks. So there was an earlier slide, but I'll skip that. And essentially what that slide was meant to do is just to give you a sense of what I'm going to talk about. But I begin with a slide. Now, some of you may have been present when Nico Kluti was talking about the state of universities on the continent. And it comes out of a project that Nico Kluti at that point did called Herana. And it was a big survey of the major research-intensive universities on the continent. And the essential conclusion to which he came was that these institutions are on the continent are in major trouble. The major publishing is coming out of South Africa on the continent. He makes a sideswipe comment. Some of you who might know Nico will know that, you know, he's capable of saying anything. He makes a sideswipe comment down that slide about the state even of the South African university sector. But he doesn't do what I think had to be done to explain why it is like that. His big observation coming out of this review that he does is that the system is full of what he says, and it's the third last point, point number 4 there, full of underprepared students and unqualified academics. That is a constructive silence. And unfortunately, that is true. And we're having to deal with that. The reality, and this is where these questions of diversity become really complicated, and where the publishing community, I think, can be playing a really constructive and helpful role in trying to turn all of this around. Now, let's just have a look at how this this shapes up. So it's really extraordinary what we inherit when we come to 1993. When just before democracy. So it's extraordinary that at that particular point in 1993, we have something like only 180,000 students who are classified African in the higher education system. And they're probably double the number of white students. The participation rate for African students at that particular point would have been under 1% in the system. We don't have, and this is why I flashed this slide here, we don't have, unfortunately for that time, the number of academics in the system who are not white. We haven't got those statistics absolutely clearly. So the first time those statistics start appearing are in clear form are when the CHE begins to do population aggregates of what's going on in the system. And yeah, look at the system, you know, the figures for 2003. People who are classified African constitute, who are academics in 2003, 23% of the academics in the higher education system. That number improves to 25% by 2007. The percentage of white academics is 62% in 2003 and 59% in 2007. Now, I said to you, we don't have the figures for 1993, but I would wager you that that number is way below even 10%. And so that's the base of which we come. And the important point to acknowledge is that we have incredible progress in the system, incredible. So when people say, and I get involved in a lot of this, Chief, I sit on lots of committees and I'm present in many institutions where these things are the subject of discussion, you know, and it's often in response to what happened in 2015. Why is there that echo? Okay. And, you know, where people say nothing has happened, nothing has changed in the system, it is not true. A lot has changed. And that change is particularly marked in our student demographics. We now have in the system now in 2021 figures for which we have, and I'm not going to show you the figures, the number of students who are classified African in the system are over 800,000. This is from you know, fewer than 200,000 in 1993. The number of academics, African academics, has also increased here. So in 2014, the number of African academics was 17,000. By the time we get to 2019, 5 years later, it's 24,000. So you're seeing movement here, but it is the same movement that is taking place, and I'm a sociologist, that is taking place in the South African, what I call social formation, the South African structure. One of the most important tip overs and changes that has happened in the structure of the South African society is the growth of the African middle class. That middle class increased from 350,000 people in total in 1993 to anything up, and yeah, we sociologists and economists are in an argument around that, any number from 5 million to 14 million. I mean, that's what has happened. But the big thing about this middle class is that it is a fragile middle class. It hasn't got the same degree of stability, if you like, that the established white middle class has coming from 1950. the established white middle class comes to like the white middle class in the United States, all of these affirmative action things that happen after 1950. The white middle class is affirmed in an incredible kind of way, so that by the time you get to 2019, it is 4 generations deep, right? It's built, its foundation. This is not the case with the African middle class. It is fragile. And so it is also in the academic community. It is growing, but it is absolutely fragile. And we have to confront that. So these are the current numbers. A feature of this fragility is evident in these appointments. So there are 24,000 academics who would be classified African by 2019, but look how many of them are temporary. 16,000. Only 8,000 permanent appointments. And this fragility is, and I'm not going to stay on the slide, this fragility is evident here. Out of 2,174 professors in South Africa in 2012, 29% are women and 14% are Black. Of the 303 Black professors, only 43 were women. That is in 2012. That number hasn't changed significantly since then. The university from which I come from, to this day, has fewer than 5 full African female professors. There are now a few, but there are fewer than 5. And this is the situation around the country. Of ASAF's 633 members in 2021, women made up 29% of that membership, and Black people 33%. The number of female African A-rated scientists, I wasn't able to properly go through that list. The list is available, and I am aware of only one. It is really quite an extraordinary thing. With the NRF's clustering system of ratings, sorry, I said the ASAF rating system. I mean the ASAF membership of fellows. And sorry, I'm confusing you. I'm not talking about ratings. The ratings, many more people are being rated in institutions around the country. But the majority of the rated people sit in 3 institutions, and they're largely white and male. Wits, UCT, Stellenbosch, increasing numbers out of universities like University of Pretoria. UJ now has a few, and it's really interesting. So the big point to make in just concluding this talk about the structure of the higher education system is that it is in motion, it is changing, but it needs a whole lot more consolidation, strengthening, and affirming of people in ways which I'd like to say higher education is trying, but we need a whole lot more of it. And this is here where I think that the publishing community can be playing a role. We've been talking about this all day today, about the structures of these established academic presses, and I'm very glad we also raised the question about these other presses that are also publishing academic texts in the country, a whole lot of them, and how much they are doing, and they clearly need to be spoken about. But these presses are too small. I've been very involved in the presses for the last 10, 15 years. When I was at UCT, I was the chair of the UCT publication committee for a little while. The point about them is, and I love this discussion that we've had today about the models for trying to make this whole enterprise a very much more sustainable enterprise. I know in all of the institutions in which I've been involved, it has been a question every single time of bottom lines. And it's never been about that old model out of which these presses historically come. It is now entirely about whether we can afford this or not. And I'd like to say to you that this question of affording it or not is a real discussion, and it cannot simply be in a sense minimized by saying they should put more money in. Because the claims that are being made inside of universities are multiple. And they all will make that same moral claim that there are stronger demands that particular people might have. No? Let me just say a few more things. Sorry. And let me just flash these slides to you. But that's not the only issue. I haven't raised this thing properly about gender. I mean, the gender question is big. The language question is absolutely incredible. The number of Afrikaans publications, journal articles, and books is going down. The movement to English on the Afrikaans campuses is now unstoppable. And it's going to accelerate. There is no indigenous language scholarly publication or press, and it's really shocking that we're in that situation. And so here's my take-home things for all of us. We have to insist in this fragility that the established people in the system do far more in helping younger people. And so I also have, for my sins, sat on many promotion committees, evaluation committees in institutions. And we've never made this question of the responsibility of older people to younger people a big issue in evaluating people. It's a big issue. We've got to make that an issue of monitoring and evaluation. I also go to lots of conferences. We've got to make the relationship, and this is where these presses also come out of. We've got to make the relationship between learned societies and presses much more organic and much stronger. We haven't spoken about learned societies, but the learned societies have gone into a little bit of a stressful time over the last few years. Sociology, where I am, the older people are abandoning these meetings here, and they're going to conferences overseas. They're neglecting their responsibilities to younger people. These conferences are full of younger people. And you go there and they're essentially talking about early work, which is often would have needed the guidance of an older person. The last point I want to make is sitting on these various structures on which I sit. I want to say to you that they are too racialized. Afrikaans speaking academics go with Afrikaans speaking peers in English. African colleagues go with African colleagues And it's racialized like that. White colleagues stay largely with their white peers. We've got to break these networks, and we've got to open them up in a way in which people don't feel that they are coming into a community of people who are hostile to them. And lastly, I want us to say that all of our conversations this morning are, and in the course of today, even this last one about PDIs, is really important in coming to understand how all of these come to produce forms of equality which produce excellence, right? Forms of equality, not the tokenism, which there is a lot of about, but excellence which allows us to speak into the global community with the, I think, insight that we have, with the value that we can contribute to solving the problems of the world. And a lot of our capacity is locked up in the ways in which we come to succumb to the seductions of these networks in which we participate, which are unhelpful. Thanks.
Excellent presentation there, Crain. You are still wrong on one fact. You are very entertaining, and I'm sure everybody quite enjoyed that. I now would like to cross over to UjalaSatgoor. Some of you in the room or in the publishing industry may be aware that she recently managed the take back of UCT Press from its operator, Juta, and has opted for the open access route. So Ujala, if you could talk us through some of that journey, and also on ensuring diversity, and it's placed high up on your agenda at UCT Press, and how you intend to achieve that. You're on mute, Ujala.
Go.
There you go.
All right. All right. Good afternoon, colleagues. And thank you very much for this invitation to share, as an academic library, our perspectives on scholarly communications and library as publisher. At the outset, I would like to actually issue a disclaimer that I'm not going to be speaking about the UCT Press, Nirode. Unfortunately, there's still some elements of hesitation and reluctance amongst certain parties at the university, or lack of understanding, really, of what a full open university press ought to be. The model is there, the whole process has been finalized. We've uploaded texts onto the site, etc., and we're seeing the impact of it. But the reluctance to migrate to a full open UCT Press is still very evident. And so at this point in time, we're still negotiating that, although the press now resides within the library, which I think is a very, very important step. So on that note, I'm going to continue with my presentation, and maybe at your next colloquium or symposium, we could present the open UCT Press model. I wish to acknowledge my colleagues, Dr. Reggie Raju, who is Director of Research and Learning, and Ms. Jill Claassen, who is our section manager on scholarly communications and research, who lead and guide the implementation of scholarly communications and library as publisher within UCT Libraries. I think it's important that when we talk about the publishing landscape and what is it that an academic library can do, we need to just step back and get a sense or an understanding of what the scholarly communications landscape is really all about. In 2003, the Association of College and Research Libraries defined scholarly communications as the system through which research and other scholarly writings are created, evaluated for quality, disseminated to the scholarly community, and preserved for future use. Over years, academic libraries have shifted from being primarily information consumers to being part of the information production aspect within a higher education institution. These are additional layers that have been added because one of our primary roles is still to collect and organize scholarly resources for discovery and use. And so as part of becoming the information producer, we have been enabled tremendously by technological innovations in the production and dissemination of scholarship. And many of you come from institutions that host institutional repositories, you're using open source software, etc. And so the skilling, the upskilling of staff and reskilling.
Ujala, sorry, may I just interrupt you for a second, Ujala? You need to put your screen on presenter mode because you're not sharing at the moment and it's not moving.
Oh dear. Now
Okay.
I knew this wasn't going to work. Okay, let me stop sharing. Let me see, because we did test it. Right. Okay.
The bottom of your screen.
There we go. Is that in share mode? No. What are you seeing now, Nirod? Are you seeing?
We're not seeing the presenter mode. Okay, can you go up to slideshow on top? Slideshow by file, home, insert the slideshow next to animation.
Gosh, this is crazy. Okay.
Yeah.
Do it like you're doing a normal PowerPoint presentation.
I'm doing that. Unfortunately.
Go on slideshow on top.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
There's a tab called slideshow on top next to animations and transitions. On top, go up, up.
I am going up.
Up a little bit more. There, the slideshow, there's a tab on top.
Sorry, I can hardly hear you.
You can, if I can come in, can you hear me better?
I can. Much
okay, so
better.
you were at the right place. So your screen was open up. You just need to go to the top, sort of, if I can call it the top toolbar, where you've got all the different icons. So let's just okay. So go to the top. You see the home button. Insert, draw, design, transitions, animations.
Yes.
Click on that, click on slideshow.
Sure.
And then say resume slideshow. Let's see what happens. Or from current slide, yes, try that.
Okay, let's go here. What are you seeing now?
Sometimes it takes a few seconds. So you did click on from current slide, right?
Yes.
Okay, just give it a few seconds. Let's see. Because I mean, you did test it earlier. I did. I was in front of my laptop when you did it, and it worked perfectly.
It's okay. Yeah.
Golly, I apologize for that. I really I really don't know what has
Yeah.
happened.
If you can just scroll down to the slide that you are talking to now, because in front of us, we see 1 and 2. I'm not sure which one you were on.
Okay. From information consumer to information producer.
Is
Are
that
you
the one
seeing
that you're
that?
on? Yes,
Yes.
you're seeing that. Okay.
Oh, golly, this is crazy. Oh, wow. Okay. All right. And you're seeing it in what mode?
Well, not in presentation. We're seeing it, you know, as if you've just opened
Okay,
your
okay,
slideshow. So
okay.
not to worry. I think let's just
All right.
continue.
Okay. All right. Okay, there we go. You know, Murphy has to be part of it for the day. Yes, so I was just speaking to the issue of how an academic library has become part of the information production at a higher education institution. And part of it is also around challenging the predominantly global North traditional publishing practices and models. And this has given us an excellent opportunity to explore open access publishing models, and also to explore further and to understand further the intellectual property management aspect to this, and thereby granting increased access to scholarship and scholarly outputs, research outputs. Okay, let me just see what I can do here. Sorry, this has gone really, really off. My apologies. Okay, so the context within which we function, and I'd like to just refer to the 2019 Open Access Symposium that UCT Libraries hosted in collaboration with the Scholarly Publishing and Academic Resources Coalition, SPARC, with the theme Open Access and Social Justice Driving African Development. And I quote the rationale for this particular symposium, where it states that it sought to challenge the open access movement and its advocates with their social justice principles to usher in equity and equal opportunity, and to open the doors for full participation of new African voices in the scholarly communication landscape, unquote. This challenge has been precipitated by the urgency for access to information and research about Africa that exist behind paywalls, as well as the need to add African research to this body of knowledge, so that continental, regional, and national development challenges are addressed equitably by informing policies, relevant interventions, and appropriate responses. I would go a step further to surmise that whilst this urgency exists to realize the SDGs, the growing confidence in the African collective and cognition of the quality of research emanating from the continent will further push towards the goal of unhindered, multi-directional participation in knowledge production. And so in exploring the whole scholarly communications landscape, academic libraries have emerged into their own by exploring various scholarly services. And these include collection development, again, alluding to one of our core functions. However, the shift towards transforming and decolonizing collections are one of the exciting challenges. However, again, we are to a certain extent challenged by the offerings of the mainstream booksellers and publishers that engage with academic libraries in South Africa. The opportunity to broaden the scope of our collections to include global South content at times is extremely limited, and I would urge publishers and booksellers to explore these possible facets of inclusion within their offerings. And of course, I'm not going to go through the whole list that I've presented here, but these are some of them that are crucial for future partnerships and collaboration development at a university between academics and the scholarly services of an academic library. And I'm going to focus very much then on developing and hosting local publishing platforms as we have done at UCT. Here we have, over a period of time, I think since 2017, started looking at the notion of library as publisher. And this is a new role that has been quite solidly cemented again in the US, but we've also explored models in Australia as well, particularly the Australian National University. And here, when we look at the part of the slide on the left, the screen grab of open access monographs, I do apologize for this not working very well, and I really don't know why it isn't functioning properly. And so if you can see the numbers, I've just given you some numbers of the downloads in the last year, not since the date of publication of these particular monographs. The first one was published on the 5th of July this year, and we already see 63 downloads of that particular title. I want to refer you to the title at the bottom, and this has become one of the noted health sciences open access textbooks on the otolaryngology. That is the one term that has really fazed us quite a bit. And this has been downloaded just in this year, 6,448 times. This particular textbook has been seriously advantaged by the different types of insertions, the video clips, the audio clips, etc., that have been inserted in this particular publication. And it has been downloaded by over 71 countries, students and professionals in over 71 countries. Included in this list was our very first open access Sesotho monograph as well. And this was published by an academic at UCT. And it's targeting teenagers at school and the issue of teenage pregnancy. And it was very well received. And we've had already within this last year over 1,300 downloads. A huge feather in our cap has been the constitutional law textbook, which also won an award, won the Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Award from the Libraries Publishing Coalition. That is a coalition of university academic library publishers in the US, with a few members from outside of the US. And we have in this last year 75,000 downloads. And this particular textbook was written by, it's actually a guide to the textbook on constitutional law. And it was written by students who participated and passed the program, obviously, but felt there was a need, there was a gap, and they seized that opportunity to write a guide to the mainstream textbook. So in embracing library as publisher, Jill Claassen shares their observations, particularly the team that has been involved in it, that you see the wide dissemination, visibility, and equitable access of materials. And I think what has grabbed everybody's attention is the span of the reach of these materials as well. In terms of publishing costs, there are minimal costs to the author, and any related technical costs for publishing are picked up by the library's budget. Diversification, here again, it is an opportunity for young academics, new academics to publish. We're also looking at the diversification of type, because we've got conference proceedings, we have monographs, we have textbooks, etc., that have been included in here as well. You're looking at multiple languages being explored. You're looking at adding other voices, like I mentioned, and other types of inclusion of formats as well. So I think when we have to look at this particular model, we use a central publishing platform, and capacity building is crucial for the success of this. According to the Library Publishing Coalition, library publishing distinguishes itself from other publishing models by a preference for open access dissemination, as well as the willingness to embrace informal and experimental forms of scholarly communication and to challenge the status quo. And so in advancing or expanding the library as publisher platform across the continent, we have initiated, and this again is a testimony to the innovation and the futures thinking of the staff that are involved in this. And here we see the creation of the continental platform, the African continental platform. And we've initiated a memorandum of understanding with the Association of African Universities. And through their aegis, we have been able to host several workshops and training opportunities for universities on the continent. And most recently, there was a 3-day workshop in Namibia, hosted by UNAM, and involved also certain government entities therein as well, towards mainstreaming open access and open access publishing. Here again, this is an attempt for the African research community to take ownership of creating and sharing its own scholarly content and its output. Here again, the diamond access model is key to this, whereby knowledge is free for access for the reader, and the author does not pay to publish at all. Here again, it is a common platform, but each institution retains their own identity and branding, which again is very important as for the collaborative initiative as well. Capacity building, as I alluded to earlier on, is crucial for countries on the continent, for universities on the continent to start claiming their own research space. My last slide refers to very much the library publisher role as establishing a community-owned, community-led scholarly communication ecosystem. This was shared in the LPC annual report of 2022. It gives us the freedom to build an inclusive, demarginalized, equitable, and diverse knowledge system. Again, here, this is Reggie Raju's personal experience of having worked, or rather, firstly, conceptualized and worked at building this particular platform, and thereby ensuring that everybody should be able to access and contribute to the knowledge that shapes our world. And this is the motto that Spark abides by. And I think that all involved in open access publishing, scholarly publishing, should be guided by as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ujala, for that very interesting insight into library as publisher. I'd just like to answer Crain's challenge about publishing in indigenous languages. we are going to be bringing to the editorial board that you sit on at NMU a new imprint called Medu, which is the Sisonga word for roots, especially in the Eastern Cape, to capture the oral history that exists in those communities and create audiobooks out of them. So it's a very interesting model that we bring into you for consideration, but it'll look at all indigenous languages, including Afrikaans, and involving Stellenbosch University. In saying that, can I open the floor for questions? And if we have any online, Susan?
Thank you, Chair. We have nothing online as yet, but I would like to acknowledge that Professor Fataar has joined us online. So I don't want to put him on the spot, but maybe we can give him perhaps opportunity or two if he would like to say a word or two. Thank you.
I know he has a medical appointment at 4 o'clock. Is he still on?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much, Niro.
Okay, all right.
Look, thank you very much, Niro, and thanks for the opportunity to speak to you for a minute or two. I just really want to raise 3 issues. I have been dipping in and out of the sessions today, so I have been following, particularly Barbara Boswell's session, where she speaks about the individual monograph. If I was going to be there, I would have spoken about leading and editing a process for 4 edited books that targeted diversification of academics who participated in this. The first one is to say that there have to be deliberate processes of capacitation of a book publishing, a book writing process that stands at a very, very important moment in the academic process. It comes from certain processes. They are capacitated via doctoral processes, for example, via intellectual work between partners, via even less academically oriented people working on a particular project in a community, in a university, and so on and so forth. So the first point that I want to make as my first of 2 points is that you have to constitute an academic book publishing community deliberatively if you want to demographically transform. This is not going to happen without an acute driving, an acute set of dynamics by which you drive this process forward. And you have to balance 2 fundamental issues. On the one hand, it is the academic integrity and quality of the process, which is not static, but it is there, it frames whatever you do. It's the peer review process, it's the editorial process, it's the going through the academic argumentative line process through the book, which is often missing in editorial book processes and so on, and holding that as the editorial team and as the editor very, very carefully in relation to, on the other hand, the relational dynamics pertaining to who is in that community, how that community is constituted, what is the intellectual capacity in that community, and moving that community forward. I want to argue that the school, or that diversifying academic publishing fundamentally turns on one's ability to conceptualize and develop an academic community in making, holding that community, and so on and so forth, but also developing a sense of working towards autonomy, but continuously engaging in that community. Secondly, is the point is that these communities you have to constitute them, you have to hold them relative to the nature of the dynamics by which they are constituted. Sometimes you work with doctoral students, and there would have been processes before that, perhaps your own doctoral students and others' doctoral students, and moving that to book publication or journal publication and so on. This involves a particular set of dynamics, but there is an intellectual or contribution already on the table that you're moving it forward into a different realm of book publishing. At other times, you're working with communities of scholars who have or already have expertise, but you're moving them forward into an academic argument. You're making that argument coherent, and fundamentally, and each of these processes require deliberative community-based dynamics. In my case, in the 4 book publications, my last point was that it takes between 2 and 3 years to constitute that community, to bring that community together periodically, to work diligently with that community, and to capacitate and to develop in such a way that you can bring academics capacity to the forefront in the ability to write these books. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Aslam. In closing, are there any other questions or comments? Okay, could I ask on Professor Soudien to just make some closing remarks, and then we can conclude. And oh, sorry, Roshan has a question.
Looking for my notes, but I've written very badly here. So it's more of a comment in a way, but I wanted Crain to talk a bit more about that, the KPAs. You mentioned one of the things possibly of mentoring from academic to student or scholar, and having that being part of a KPA, which I think is a great initiative. And I would say that could be taken further with ones that are also developing their PhDs into books. So from a diversity point of view, we are seeing newer scholars entering into the fray, but there is a lot of shaping that needs to happen, and they're getting sort of turned down at the peer review process, and then that can be quite brutalizing for a newer writer. So it feels like there's also that mentoring that could happen on that publication, preparing them for publication. And then I also wondered if we couldn't extend that to getting more peer reviewers into the system, because getting diverse peer reviewers and growing the peer review pool also feels like it needs a kind of incentivization. And I did a very broad brush strokes, assessment of the racial demographics of authors that we published over 10 years. And we definitely have seen an increase in our Black male authorship base. Our female authorship base is kind of really also changed very, very minimally. And peer reviewers have also, it tends to be largely more white males that we find in the dominant, and of course it's over a 10-year period. But just thinking forward in trying to get diversity on those kinds of fronts, how could we work in a way from the university system to incentivize those? Thanks.
That's quite a tall order. Crain, do you want to respond from the podium? Okay.
So I can't answer your question explicitly, except to say everybody has to do more. And it's an awkward thing to say that to a South African community, because the more in the South African context is never free of the politics. There are always going to be particular dynamics involved in how people come together. So we quite correctly are talking about our attempt to insert ourselves into the global community on our own terms. And I think we need to be quite clear about the very distinctive nature of bearding that challenge. I used this word beard once, and somebody said, what does that word mean? Why don't you use ordinary words? It means confronting that challenge. We sit here with a very particular problem. We have world-class already. The North is already here. We have elements of the North in the ways in which we are doing things, but we are very aware of what the shortcomings of those elements of the North are. And so this discussion about experimenting in all kinds of ways, I think, is what we're needing to do. But we can't go through that process of experimentation in the racial divisive frameworks in which we live. I mean, those frameworks are so, if you like, debilitating at every single point of the step, because kindness is, if you like, passed in racial terms, and it does come with racial baggage. So we've got to be quite conscious here, Roshan. We've got to be quite conscious about the political steps which we are taking to assert the validity of our excellence. You know, and it's not something which you can bring somebody like myself here and to say to you, here's a plan to make it work. It's got to involve all of those things. Some of the things that Aslam is talking about, you know, are elements of that. But it's got to be brought into the structure of all of these institutions, you know, in which we find ourselves. And we mustn't be afraid of wanting to be good, which a lot of the time we are, you know. And so we have in our structural system this idea that international is better. And it's bad. I mean, that's problematic. And we get patronized by these internationalists like that. You know, so we've got a lot of thinking to do about how we proceed. But the best way, and this is my same thing I say to universities and schools, the best way, let us talk about our experiments. Let's talk about these initiatives that we are undertaking and how they are working. And if they're not working, why are they not working? And be diagnostic like that. So let us concentrate on on what we are doing and make that the empirical basis on which we come to an understanding of where we might go. We might learn something about ourselves in the process of doing that. We are not going to learn by simply copying other people, because these other ethnographies, these other ethnographic, these other social situations which all of these other colleagues are talking to us about are valuable, but they are not the complexity with which we are having to deal with here. So it's deliberativeness, but there has to be generosity on the part of all of us in entering into all of this. And the nature of that generosity is not just kindness, it is wanting something better. Wanting something better for all of us.
Thank you very much for that, Crain. I think we opened on a very positive note, and we're closing with a challenge. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us to take this seriously, and this forum that we're in, and to give it horns, and to put that agenda of being good back into publishing, and to look at those partnerships that Bawa spoke about earlier, and looking at working together. I think that's clearly come out in our deliberations today. And in saying that, I'd like to hand over to Prof. Thomaselli to make some concluding remarks for today. Thank you.